Before it became a cultural touchstone, before the Oscars, the memes, and the high school history debates, Braveheart was just a passion project with a questionable budget and a director who didn't even want to star in it. But what happened behind the scenes? Because that's where things got messy, in the best possible way. These are 7 little-known facts about the making of Braveheart. And trust us, they're just as intense as the movie itself. Mel Gibson almost didn't star in it. Let's rewind to the early 90s. Mel Gibson was already a household name, Lethal Weapon, Mad Max, international stardom locked in. But what he really wanted to do was direct, and Braveheart was that passion project. A sprawling, violent, heart-thumping historical epic that Hollywood didn't exactly know what to do with. Gibson's original plan? Direct only. He felt he was too old to play William Wallace, being 41 at the time, portraying a man likely in his early 30s. Plus, after years in front of the camera, he was itching to move behind it full-time. But the studio wasn't buying it. Executives at Paramount were blunt. No Gibson, no green light. They believed international audiences wouldn't show up for an unknown lead, especially in a risky, bloody period drama with a 3-hour runtime and no guarantees. So Gibson reluctantly strapped on the sword and painted his face blue. It wasn't vanity, it was a strategy. And ironically, the same face they thought would sell tickets ended up behind the director's monitor between takes. Most of it wasn't shot in Scotland. Now, here's something that might sting if you've got even a drop of Scottish pride in you. Most of Braveheart's sweeping Scottish vistas? Yeah, not Scotland at all. While the film proudly waves the saltire and plants its feet deep in the Highlands, the truth is that much of the action, especially the gritty, mud-soaked battle sequences, was actually filmed in Ireland. Why? 3 reasons: money, logistics, and manpower. Scotland's terrain is stunning, sure. But staging massive battles with thousands of extras and galloping horses? Not easy or cheap. That's where Ireland came to the rescue. Quite literally. Enter the Irish Army Reserve. Mel Gibson and his team struck a deal with the Irish government, and in return, they got access to around 1,600 trained Army reservists. Not movie extras, real military men. That's not a typo. Over 1,000 disciplined, physically conditioned individuals showed up ready to charge, clash, and fall dramatically to the ground on cue. Each of them was outfitted in medieval-style costumes, armed with prop swords, shields, and a healthy respect for stage combat. But they brought more than bodies, they brought structure. These weren't just guys swinging rubber axes for fun, they moved in formation, they followed choreography, and they could reset takes without chaos breaking out. On top of that, the production got access to military horses, sprawling open land that didn't require endless permits, and an operational efficiency most Hollywood war epics can only dream about. And sure, Scotland did still play its part. Those breathtaking shots of mist-covered hills, that's the real deal. Intimate scenes between characters set against lonely lochs and windswept cliffs? Pure Highlands. But the blood, the mud, the manic energy of charging armies? That's Irish soil under those boots. And if you really want to ruin the illusion, watch some of those battle scenes closely. With so many extras doing take after take in heavy costumes under a hot sun, little slip-ups start to pop. You might catch a guy grinning mid-swing, slipping on a patch of grass. Or this actually happened, checking his wrist like he's waiting for the pub to open. It's the kind of behind-the-scenes detail that doesn't ruin the movie. It makes it more epic. Because Braveheart wasn't just about historical accuracy, it was about creating a world. And sometimes, to bring that world to life, you've got to borrow a neighbor's backyard and a few thousand of their soldiers. The battle scenes were a nightmare to film. They look chaotic on screen, but filming them? That was chaos turned up to 11. Every battle in Braveheart had to be planned like a military operation. Hundreds of extras, dozens of horses, smoke machines, blood cannons, flaming arrows, and actors trying not to die in the middle of it all. And unlike today's CGI-heavy setups, this was mostly practical. They were out there day after day, in the mud, with fake limbs and real bruises flying. Injuries were common: cuts, sprains, concussions. One extra reportedly broke his nose and came back the next day. Because, of course he did. To save time and budget, Gibson and his editors reused footage across battles. That wide shot of charging infantry, you might have seen it 2 or 3 times without realizing it. They just flip the frame or change the background smoke. Smart? Absolutely. Safe? Debatable. Exhausting? Without question. Historically accurate? Not quite. Let's be honest, Braveheart treats historical accuracy the way a toddler treats a bedtime. It acknowledges it briefly and then completely ignores it. Yes, William Wallace was a real person. Yes, he led a rebellion against English rule. But just about everything else in the film, that's Mel Gibson pouring a gallon of dramatic sauce over a Wikipedia stub. Let's start with the most obvious anachronism, the kilts. In Braveheart, Wallace and his men proudly strut around in flowing tartan kilts, looking like a rebellious clan of plaid-clad rock stars. Except kilts didn't exist in Scotland until the 16th century. Wallace's rebellion happened in the late 13th century. That's a 300-year gap. The real Wallace probably wore something closer to a long linen tunic with chainmail, practical maybe. Cinematic? Not so much. And what about that iconic blue war paint? You know the look, half Mel Gibson's face slathered in woad, ready to scream freedom into cinematic history. Visually stunning. Historically, well, again, not so much. That blue face paint is inspired by the Picts, ancient Celtic warriors who lived in Scotland nearly 1,000 years before Wallace. They used woad to intimidate Roman invaders, not English monarchs. Wallace would have never even heard of this stuff. But hey, when you're staging a rebellion with slow-motion horse charges and swelling bagpipe scores, historical nuance takes a backseat to cool factor. Now, let's talk about Princess Isabella, or as historians might call her, the timeline-breaking plot device. In Braveheart, Isabella is portrayed as a beautiful French princess who not only sympathizes with Wallace, but falls head over heels into his arms. And, we're led to believe, into his bed. There's even a cheeky suggestion that she carries his child, implying Wallace fathered the future King of England. Problem is, when Wallace died in 1305, Isabella was about 9 years old. She didn't even set foot in England until years after his execution. So unless Wallace was secretly a time traveler, that love story, pure Hollywood fanfiction. These aren't little oversights, they're massive historical gymnastics. And yet, the film never pretends to be a dusty textbook. In interviews, Mel Gibson never claimed he was making a documentary. He was making a legend, a modern myth, something that captured the emotional truth of rebellion and sacrifice, even if the facts were tossed out the window and trampled by a warhorse. As Gibson put it, it was less about footnotes and more about feeling, about rage, pride, injustice, and the primal desire for freedom. The blue paint, the kilts, the scandalous romance, they're symbols, not citations. And did that approach work? Well, ask the 5 Oscars. It might have driven historians up the wall, but Braveheart didn't just survive its inaccuracies, it thrived on them. Because at its heart, the film wasn't trying to be real. It was trying to be epic. And on that front, mission accomplished. Mel Gibson directed Barefoot and Shirtless. Picture this. A massive battlefield set, hundreds of extras, smoke drifting across a hillside, and in the middle of it all, Mel Gibson. Barefoot, shirtless, screaming into a megaphone. That's not a fever dream. That's how he directed. On days when morale was low or logistics were slowing things down, Gibson would step onto set in full William Wallace mode, sometimes still covered in blood, war paint, and leather straps from the last take. It wasn't just for show, it was about energy, keeping the cast connected to the moment, reminding everyone what they were making and why it mattered. Crew members reportedly nicknamed him Mad Maximus behind his back, a mashup of his 2 most iconic roles. But there was affection behind the nickname. Even when he was barking directions barefoot in the mud, he earned their respect. Because here's the thing, say what you want about Gibson, but he was in it. All the way. It was nearly rated NC-17. You thought Braveheart was violent now? The original cut made it look like a bedtime story. The first version Gibson submitted to the MPAA had far more graphic violence, extended impalings, longer beheadings, and even more blood spurts than what we saw in theaters. The ratings board came back with a firm verdict, NC-17, which, for a major studio release in the 90s, was basically a death sentence. So, Gibson did what many directors reluctantly do. He trimmed, carefully, strategically. He shaved frames off here and there, shortened sequences by seconds, and tweaked sound design to reduce the visceral punch. In the end, he managed to keep the brutality while just barely squeezing under the R-rating line. The result? A film that feels raw and unfiltered, but was actually engineered to survive the system. It wasn't a box office lock. You'd think a movie with Mel Gibson, massive battles, and soaring bagpipe scores would be a slam dunk at the box office, right? Wrong. Paramount was skeptical. Period pieces were risky. Historical dramas, even riskier. And Braveheart was long, nearly 3 hours, filled with thick accents, brutal violence, and not exactly brimming with date-night energy. So the studio gave it a soft launch. A modest release, no massive marketing blitz, no early confidence. But here's where it gets wild. Word of mouth did the heavy lifting. People left the theater and told their friends, "You have to see this." Oscar buzz kicked in, critics called it bold, gutsy, and unflinching. And slowly, the numbers grew. Eventually, Braveheart raked in over $200 million worldwide. Not bad for a film no one expected to win, or even survive. So what do you get when you combine myth, mayhem, muddy fields, and Mel Gibson with a megaphone? Apparently, 5 Oscars, a cultural phenomenon, and one of the most intense behind-the-scenes stories of the 90s. Which Braveheart fact surprised you the most? The shirtless directing, the near NC-17 rating, or the fact that none of those sweeping Scottish battles were even shot in Scotland? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more wild movie-making stories, hit like, hit subscribe, and we'll keep the deep dives coming. Freedom might have been a scream in the script, but making this film, it was a war of its own.